All right, the recording just started. Thanks everybody for joining. We are going to be talking about the Azure developer journey and how you can accelerate developer velocity and improve your developer experience through platform engineering. With that, we will have our speaker, Matt. Matt, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. So it's not just myself; it's myself and Clinton, who's on the call. I'm Matt Brofart. I am a national solutions architect for Capgemini. Work in the Sogeti business unit. So Capgemini is a multinational IT services consulting company in many countries. We specialize. Sogeti specializes in specifically in software engineering and development activities. So nice to meet everyone. Clinton is my counterpart today. Clinton, if you want to do a quick intro.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Matt. I'm Quentin Avery. I've been with Capgemini also for about 3 years, and I joined as a dev, and now I'm a team leader. And yep, so a little bit of experience with the woes of developing things and pushing them to the cloud. Hopefully, what we show today will help with some of that. Back to you, Matt.
Okay. So I'm gonna start out by with a little bit of backstory. I have a deck, a couple slides, nothing fancy. And then we're gonna do a little demo. We won't take the full time. We can have conversation after if we need to. So um, for those of you that have been around for the last 10 years of getting a little echo on somebody there. For those of you who've been around for, the beginnings of Azure and when all this stuff started to come out, you know that probably, I don't know, it was maybe almost 10 years ago, it was a little bit easier to deploy an application to Azure than it might seem to be now, just based on the corporate structure that we've built around maybe making it harder for developers to actually get something to work in production. Um, if you remember early on, you used to be able to open up Visual Studio, start a new project from a template, say that you want to deploy it to a web app with or a web API with a static single page app front end, Angular, React. You wanted to get that out to Azure fairly quickly and get it working, right? And then have users hit it and start playing. Initially, that was fairly trivial and easy to do. It scaffolded out the project. Um, it built your Azure infrastructure. It also would build your CI/CD pipeline in Azure DevOps, and done. Easy peasy, right? Push your code, and the commit or the push or the pull request would automate the pipeline, deliver to a dev environment or QA environment, run some unit tests. That would trigger moving to a higher environment, and your Azure infrastructure would get deployed, and your application would get deployed to that Azure infrastructure. Well, we realized that we needed security, right? So we need guardrails. We can't just have developers do whatever they want whenever they want. There has to be some fences, right? There have to be some guardrails. There has to be some security policies. We can't just use whatever new feature comes out in Azure because we think it's cool. It needs to be proven, it needs to fall within enterprise standards, and the architectural runway and policy needs to be built out for that. So over time, uh, that concept, sort of, in my opinion, got bloated as well to the point where you now are slowing down the development process. That's, I think, where the inspiration behind this presentation is. Increasing developer velocity, making the developer experience more satisfactory, just increasing overall developer satisfaction and happiness, and reducing the time to market on new features. So I'm going to share this um, deck, hopefully. Tell me if you can see it. Okay. So common, this is not, so I'm presenting as Capgemini. This is our collateral. Um, this is not unique to any one company. We see it across the board with almost every client who was a early adopter of cloud. Even the later adopters, I would say if your cloud journey is starting now, you're lucky because you can skip all this, right? But what we've seen and we've documented is the typical developer journey today now has a lot of friction. And the critical path now with getting a working application, which I used to be able to do in an afternoon, right? And you see Scott Hanselman do it in an hour presentation all the time. And you see the app in a day all the time. But then you go back to work and you try to deploy a new application, and you're lucky if you get that done in a month, right? This is a little artwork by Clinton. Actually, he's an artist. He drew this. Yeah, what did you call this, Clinton? What was your name for this?
The roller coaster of death, something
Roller
like that.
coaster of death, or roller coaster of doom, right? Because as you get further down, the G forces get higher and higher to the point where it's unsustainable. And so it's all these handoffs to other teams that even though DevOps is trying to get rid of silos and get rid of handoffs, by introducing cloud platform teams and operations teams and all these separate parts of the IT enterprise, we've just kind of moved and shifted those old problems into different areas. And over time, these platform teams and guardrail teams and security teams have gotten bigger and become another bottleneck, another cog that causes a slowdown in the process. So for example, um, consulting with a cloud platform team on how best to use the cloud platform, that's a that's a cycle that you could go through multiple iterations on, right? Just to determine what part of the cloud you're able to use, in this case, Azure. So if you're a new developer in an organization, you come in and you just want to get an app out there, you have some onboarding time. You're going to have to meet with product owners, business analysts, solution architect or portfolio architect or application architects. You're going to have to read through lots of documentation, find approved architectural patterns. And that's all before you've even gone to the cloud team to even find out what infrastructure they've provisioned for you, or what capabilities they're going to allow you to deploy to. Are they going to let you do AKS? Are you going to do app services? Are you going to do functions? Are you going to do logic apps? Can you use a service bus? What's your API gateway? All those types of things. A new developer onboarding to the organization, it takes time for them to figure out what what to use. What's the approved architecture? And so that's one slowdown. And then once you do get past all of those initial roadblocks or slow points or friction points, I guess I'd call it, um, then you still run into deployment problems. And observability and monitoring tools, security scanning tools, pen testing, all those things. You have to meet with those teams. So this is just depicting sort of the problem statement of a common issue that we see across the board. And so our solution, something that we've been working on, um, came to fruition recently because of some new concepts that Azure has released in the last year that are still maturing. I'd say they're still early adopter. I'm not sure the exact status of them at the moment. But it's this three pieces. So there's Azure command line, Azure developer command line tool, which Microsoft is calling AZD. It's a executable, or it's a command line script tool that has bundled together the concepts of scaffolding out a standard project template from like a Visual Studio scaffolding or a VS Code scaffolding, along with using infrastructure as code and pipeline as code, YAML scripts, Bicep, or Terraform to initialize your Azure infrastructure, initialize your CI/CD pipeline, and then ultimately deploy that to an environment, whether it's a lower or higher or testing. Then on the other piece of this is a new concept called the Azure Dev Center, and the Azure Dev Center brings these things together into a common sort of portal to aggregate your infrastructure as code, pipeline as code, and your architectural pattern or template. And then the third piece of this, sort of on the ops side in Azure, managing it all, is the ADE or Azure Deployment Environments, where it's predefined the way those environments can be used, along with policy and guardrails, monitoring and observability, all built into that. So what we're trying to do here is, increase the core DevOps metrics by reducing the friction in the DevOps process in the entire, for the symbol, the infinity symbol that we always see with coincides with DevOps practices, decreasing time to market, increasing the amount of changes that a dev team can deploy out, and in doing so, the more teams deploy, um, the better they get at deploying. It builds that resiliency and the muscle memory for the team, which ultimately can reduce your change failure rate because you're getting better at something because you're doing it more frequently, and also your time to recovery because you're able to do things faster because you're doing it more often and you're building up that muscle memory. So these three pieces that are specific to Azure at the moment: the Azure Developer Command Line tool, AZDCLI. I think Harrison's posting some links to this, so thank you. The Azure Dev Center, which pulls all of these things together with your architecture, infrastructure code, and pipeline as code. And then the Azure deployment environments, which helps you enforce your default policy guardrails and your SRE stuff for monitoring and observability, whatever those tools are. So this is just a depiction of the components with a standard architecture. We're going to demo a basic static web app with a .NET App Service plan behind it, and a SQL database that uses Azure Monitor and shows some monitoring. It's going to have a storage account and key vaults, and this is probably a typical, it's a typical web app pattern for the most part. And what what we're providing here, or what this concept and building a platform like this does, is it predetermines what architectures the organization has approved to build an app from. So rather than a new developer getting onboarded and having to go talk to architecture and get architecture review board, or work with a dev lead or an application lead, they can simply go to a internal developer portal or the Azure provided developer portal and choose from predetermined list of application architectural patterns. In this case, this is the one I'm showing you, that have been pre-vetted. The infrastructure's code's already written in Terraform or Bicep, ARM YAML, and the standard pipeline as code has already been written. And that pipeline would include approval gates, testing, unit testing, quality testing, security vulnerability scanning, and whatever else you needed to put in a standard pipeline at the organizational level. Excuse me. And then it would also include the SRE monitoring and observability dashboard as part of the deployment. So as a new developer, again, I'm focusing on this new developer and a greenfield application coming into the organization. You don't have to necessarily spend a bunch of time learning how the organization does things technically. You can go to this developer portal, choose from a list of pre-built architectures, and have an application up and running deployed to Azure in very little time, and only need to focus on that core business logic within the Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio IDE, writing your API code or your custom code. You can spend your time doing that work and truly understanding the business and not have to be an expert in all of the other pieces. Now you can be an expert in those pieces if you want to, but you can deliver a, world-class enterprise application without having to know exactly how to build out a CI/CD pipeline, without having to know any Terraform or Bicep or ARM, um, and without having to know what the organizational's security scanning tooling is, or hooks in the CI/CD pipelines. And I think that has been um, the new tech debt, right, that we've built up over the last 5 to 10 years in these cloud platforms. They have gotten bloated, and they're hard to navigate, especially for new employees and for existing employees, for that matter. So, next step, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart Clinton to do an actual demo where we're going to walk through. We have three roles here. One's a developer, um, and then one. Well, I'll just let you take the reins and be the developer on this. But
Okay.
the scenario, the setup for this is that Clinton's a new employee coming into the organization. He's onboarded. He has his equipment. He knows how to program. He's been a Visual Studio. He's got Visual Studio. He knows how to use it. C# .NET developer. But he doesn't know anything about the organizational lay of the land, where things are at architecturally, their Azure environment, how to build CI/CD pipelines. He's met with a architect that says just use the Azure developer command line tool and go with the architecture that is a static web app with an API behind it, and get this out to Azure so that we can get it tested as quick as possible. So Clinton, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay, cool. I'll share my screen here. And then I'm going to just pretend like, as Matt said, like I'm just a new developer that's joining and is going to make a change. So let's see here. I'm sharing my screen, sorry.
Yeah, before we jump to, I should have stopped and asked, are there any questions, comments? Anybody have any things they want more clarity on before we go to the next step here? Okay.
One thing I will call out is AZD might sound scary if you're reading over those documents, but a lot of the quick starts from Microsoft are using it, and it's a super seamless experience. So be open to it if you're scared of it, because if you're just, I'm sure what you're going to show here, if you're just being dropped into an environment that it's already set up and configured, it's super awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and along those lines, it's kind of connecting with what you were saying, Matt, like back in the old days where you could just pull down that template in Visual Studio and get something up and running. This is kind of a return to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Visual Studio, and I'm going to just start up a new project and do this from the command line in Visual Studio. So I'll just open Visual Studio. Once you get that up, you just need to authenticate with Azure. Oops, it'd help if I use the right command. Don't need Copilot at the moment. And then after logging in, so it's all about connecting to those templates. So you can run, well, let me make a new directory first. So once you have your new directory, you do azd init. And this prompts you, you can either use code that you've got in your directory if you want to create a new, create something from code that you've written, or you can do select template. And this is actually connecting out to a template catalog that's out there. So I'm going to do that, go down that path. And I'm actually going to, so we're connecting to the Azure samples. So I'm just going to scroll through this list and I'm going to find the template that I want, which is going to be a React app with C# and a SQL database backend.
I will also mention, and maybe Harrison or Alec, sorry, I call you Harrison. I know I work with another guy named Harrison. Maybe you already shared this, but there is a portal within Microsoft Learn or something that has a bunch of these architectures. They're published, and then it also has diagrams and description. I think it's maybe no, it's in GitHub. It's called Awesome. I'll find the link.
Yeah, the awesome repository. Yeah, awesome templates or something. I know what you're talking about, Matt. Okay, so the azd init is complete now. So once you've done your init, then you can do azd up. And up kind of combines two commands. There's like a provisioning step and a deployment step. So it runs both of those at once. So if I do azd up, it's going to go into the folder that I've initialized here, and it's going to go into the infrastructure. There's some bicep files in there. I don't think it matters which subscription I use here.
As long as I paid my bill, it'll work.
That's right. Okay, so at this point, it's creating a new resource group. I might as well just go in here and look at that. So the resource group is RG testing new app. Let's see if that shows up in here. So here's the resource group. And as it goes through this process, then we can just see all of those components created. And this it doesn't really take a huge amount of time. I think the last time I ran it, it took like 5 minutes to do the provisioning step and to do the application deployment, which maybe 5 minutes seems like a lot of time to be waiting. But one of the things that you get with this AZD CLI approach isn't just like a faster thing, but having it automated, it's like all you have to do is, a one click or, type in a few things, and then, yeah, you have to wait for it, but you don't have to think about anything else. So if you just think about all the work that's sort of abstracted away, all you have to do is type in this. The developer doesn't have to actually go in and create the key vault and do a lot of context switching. Like I'm just staying in Visual Studio and I'm at the CLI. So if I wanted to, I could go take a break. Actually, Matt, I don't know if we want to sit and wait. I can actually just show.
I'm fine with sitting and waiting. It's
Okay.
nice to see this complete.
Okay.
And Alec, maybe we open up for questions while we're waiting, or we can have conversation now.
Sure. If anybody has Any questions, feel free to shout them out or post them in chat. I haven't seen that repo you guys are referencing. If you have that handy, that'd be cool to
I'll
see
find it.
also.
Yeah, I'll find it. It's open source, it's GitHub open. Anybody can contribute to it. There's some really good stuff. There's some really good stuff in there. While we're waiting, I'll also add that this is not magic, right? You still have to build. What we're saying is the concept and the theory is here. The pieces are there. You still have to build your policy, your platform, right? You still have to
Right.
build the guardrails and the security into that back end. But from an enterprise developer's perspective, once that's built and it's working, a platform team or whoever wants to do it, even the development team, could continue to maintain that in an inner source style. But a new developer coming in that doesn't necessarily know those things, or a more green developer that doesn't need to know all those things, could come in and be productive on day one and deliver apps, APIs, components much faster than the current churn of RBAC requests, security requests, infrastructure provisioning requests, new resource group, those types of things that we often find ourselves waiting on today.
Yeah,
Now,
and
if you're just, go ahead.
well, I was going to say that right now I'm demonstrating using this public Azure samples repository that contains the catalog of templates. And what you can do, you can have a private catalog of templates, which we also set up. And then the way that works is in the Azure portal, you create something called a dev center, and your dev center has catalogs associated with it. So your dev center has a catalog and it just points at the repository that holds whatever templates your platform engineering team or whoever comes up with that at your organization you'd want to keep those in source control. So the demonstration I'm doing is using the public ones that Microsoft has, the Azure samples, but then your organization, you have a GitHub repository or something in Azure DevOps. All of your templates would be in there, and you'd point to them through your DevX or your Dev Center in the Azure portal. But the commands in the background would be the same. The only difference would be this list that I was showing here, where I scrolled through this massive list. That list would just show your the templates that are in your repository that you've established. Just a little technical note there.
That's pretty cool. My
I should
first
have.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alec.
I was gonna say my first interaction with this at all is the Azure OpenAI search demo, which is pretty crazy if you think about it, because it does the orchestration of your deploying your environment, provisioning the right roles and permissions, deploying the infrastructure, running all of your documents through like form recognizer. So it'll even run some Python scripts behind the scenes for you, and basically takes this entire environment, and you as the end user just do AZD up. And assuming you have the right permissions, you go from nothing to an entire intelligent application that is now able to ask questions on your data, which I think is super crazy because you're like, wow, this is so easy. And then you start breaking down all the pieces that it does. And yeah, like you said, it's not magic, but it kind of feels like magic if you don't dig into the bolts and all the pieces of it going on. Cause you're just like, I ran one command, waited, I think you
Yeah,
said 5 minutes for this example. That one takes, I think, like 15-ish because there's a lot
that's
more pieces. But in
still
15
that's
minutes,
fast.
yeah, I go from nothing to being able to ask AI questions about my documents that I had, and then citations that the web app can then point to, blob storage, and find them all. It's crazy.
So yeah, I don't want to get any hate mail from Microsoft, but I'm pretty sure that this was built so that Copilot works.
Go on.
So I think if you use Copilot to build and deploy an application to Azure,
Hmm.
I think this had to exist first, right? So the pre-built architectures, the pre-built infrastructure as code with the pipelines and all those things to get an app built and deployed,
Hmm.
those are probably what's behind the scenes of when you do use Copilot to do these things.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, they had to Copilot has to have something, right? And I think it's using these. If you go to that link that Corey pasted on GitHub, awesome AZD, I think that's the back end to some of the Copilot magic. It's just a guess.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be the first time Microsoft builds something for themselves and then lets other people use. And
No, yep.
I mean, we all benefit at least because they're able to make it out. But yeah, it makes sense of how they're doing all that sort of stuff. I don't know either way, but yeah, I think that's cool.
Which is a good thing also that means we'll continue to support it um, and build on it and make it better.
Right.
Yeah, speaking of making things better. Okay, so this took 8 minutes and 28 seconds. So in a second, I'll go in and we should be able to see that website that came up. But I was gonna mention like the obvious that this is only for, accelerating development in the cloud. So if your organization has like on-premise applications, it'd be nice if there was some additional functionality that would accelerate that process, but AZD is pretty good for the cloud stuff.
But it can be
So
we did talk about that before, Clinton, that we could use this to build the pipelines, which would ultimately deploy infrastructure on-prem, even though it's not building out the infrastructure on-prem, which is you don't need to, right?
generally, yeah. So let's see. I think if I go into my web app service here, and then I can just go to that website and it should pull up. So here's the to-do list application that's running. I wonder if I can add an item. Looks like it's still loading for some reason. Not sure. It's probably too soon.
Still yeah, it just says loading. Did you have a database behind it, or was it just JSON data?
No, it does have a SQL database back there. So it should work. My other one I think did. Test. Yeah, so that's working on that one. So anyway, like the point is 8 minutes and 28 seconds to get all of these components created, infrastructure, and then the API and the web app deployed. That's not too bad. And there's a dashboard, I guess, that comes with this too. So in the resource group, one of the things that they defined for their infrastructure was just a dashboard that would give you a lot of observability telemetry on what's going on with your app. So that's kind of nice too. So a few little bells and whistles there with that template.
Yeah, and like I said before, it's like, and Alec, it's not magic. You do have to go customize and build those templates behind the scenes. But out of the box, if you're just a single developer and you want to experiment and learn Azure, this is a really good way to do it because these pre-built, that's awesome AZD pre-built architectures are going to scaffold out um, well-known, widely used, common best practices, architectural patterns for deploying applications to Azure. And so it's a good way to learn those patterns and also
Yeah.
see all the Azure infrastructure get built for you.
Yeah. And just if you just think about enabling the developer, like look how many commands I ran, it's like 4 commands. So literally that could have been the first week of a developer joining an organization. If the platform engineering team has those templates set up, has a little catalog of the application architectures that can be deployed in their organization, then you just tell them, hey, go in, do your AZD up, initialize the project, go through the template, grab this one, and you're off and running. So it's a big time developer enabler. Saves a lot of time for new people.
And then, but wait, there's more, right? Second common problem. Clinton, are we done with all the provisioning for this?
Yeah. Yep. It's
Okay.
all finished.
So the second problem is, we can build a greenfield app. That's great. Good job. But what if you want to go make a change to an existing app? Or how do I get an existing app into this platform? Well, it's the same process. If you so you can take existing apps and you can build the architectural template from that app and then put that into one of your predetermined architectural patterns. And then you can use the same AZD command line to go into that repo, that project, make a change, and then redeploy it. Now there's again, it's not magic. You need to have things that maintain infrastructure state like Terraform state or whatever you're using for infrastructure as code, so that you're not destroying existing infrastructure before you deploy changes to it. And Clinton, do we have time to show coming back in and making a change to the application once you've already deployed it? So were you going to do that as today's demo?
You can give it a try.
Yeah, you
So
didn't show the GitOps stuff and the repo and the code, the source code. So maybe
so
you do that.
yep. Let's see. So in here, so this is test API 04. So let's just open that in a different project here. All right. All right, so
Yes.
this is when we did the AZD init, this is what it pulled down. And this all matches the template in that Azure samples. So everything here, when we do AZD init and we pick this template, it's like cloning it and bringing it down. And then in here, so you've got your infra, and the bicep files are defining all of the infrastructure stuff. So everything that we saw in that role group that was being created, the app service plan, the database, the dashboard, all that, that's all defined in these bicep files. And then the source folder here contains the logic portion of the app, I guess you would say. We have the API backend and the web front end. So I wonder if I can go into the web front end and find a layout and just change it.
Yeah, so the scenario, I guess the setup for the scenario here is Clinton built the application and now his last name's Avery. So Clinton went on vacation and now we need to make a change to the application, and Avery is going to come in and
His alter
find
ego.
his alter ego, find the repo, get to that source code, make a change, and then redeploy that application.
So what kind of a change would we make here? We could do something simple, I suppose. So here's the to-do list menu. So maybe if we look at, oops, the application that's out here, guessing we're changing this. Windows is trying to be too helpful for me. So, well, let's just change the placeholder name from new list to awesome list. So if we make that change and just hit save, then all we have to do is say azd deploy. Oops, got to be in the right directory first. So test API 004. And then, so we've already made our change. The customer said new list is lame, make it awesome list. Okay, I made my code change, I saved it. And then you don't have to do azd up if your infrastructure is already there and you didn't make an you didn't make an infrastructure change. So azd up does an infra and does a deploy. So if you're just making a code change, then all you have to do is do azd deploy and it'll take it away. I'm wondering if in this view using Copilot, so we could have gone that route of using Copilot to say, oops, to-do list, please change the placeholder to say amazing list instead of awesome list. So let's see what our robot friend says about that. Okay, so there you go. It looks like you could just accept it right there and then you're good. Accept. So you don't even need a developer to have
It's so easy
skills.
a business person can do it, right?
Yeah, I really don't think it's true, but I don't know. I'd be interested
So
to hear what everyone says about GitHub Copilot. Anyway, this thing is deployed. What were you going to say, Matt?
yeah, we're at about 12 minutes left, so I just want to make sure we're Harris or dang it, Alec. I keep calling you Harrison. Alec, did you have any housekeeping things you need to discuss at the end of this call, or can we go to the end?
No, you can go to the end. Well,
Okay.
So there's the change. So that's like if you're thinking about your just that developer loop and how that can take a long time to like make a change and get it out there, and you have to go through a bunch of steps, builds and releases and whatnot. This kind of did away with all that. All I did was make the change, azd deploy, and my change was out there, like actually in a deployed environment. And so that really is kind of tightening up that dev loop in a nice way. Kind of cool.
And so there's still some to-dos to make this enterprise ready, I think.
Let's add them to the list here, Matt. We've got a to-do
Yeah,
app. So
let's add them to the list. We need to incorporate the pipeline, right? So it may change the way you do DevOps. So if you do decide to embrace this, it could potentially change the way you go about doing pipelines and releases. But it doesn't necessarily have to, right? Because when you see the deploy here, you're deploying your application infrastructure to Azure without going through a pipeline potentially. However, you can still add that pipeline in and do it that way. You can use the AZD tool in the pipeline rather than having the developer need to do it here. You could trigger the AZD commands on a PR approval or commit or push. Um, and then adding in the quality control gates and security gates into pipelines is something that would have to be added to this. And then figuring out your environment strategy for how do you go from dev to test to maybe a pre-prod or a UAT and then to production. What's that look like? And everybody does it a little bit different, um, depending on the organization. And I think there's more than one way to skin that. But I think that's for the most part what we wanted to demo for you guys today, to show you these new concepts in Azure, get people using them and contributing back to the community. Clinton, you have anything else that you wanted to show today?
No, nothing from my end.
All right, Alec, thank you.
Yeah,
Any
it looks like we have
questions?
a question in the chat. I don't know if you guys have any particular or answer on this. Is the platform using is this platform using Azure Static Web Apps adequate for a scalable single page SaaS application? So I think there's
Yeah,
kind of
that's
a
two
couple
questions,
questions
kind
there.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do have, yeah, I've seen, well, and Alec, you can answer this too, but Azure Static Web App with a API backend is probably one of the most scalable things that Azure has, maybe with the exception of AKS, depending on how you're using it. So that's definitely enterprise. Many people are using that, to serve up millions of users all the time, daily. Does that answer that question?
I think so. Oh, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, that's helpful. And as far as security, also, I get in with your architecture. I see you're using Key Vault and secrets. To we're just wrestling with securing our connection strings right now. But it
Hmm.
sounds like there's definitely mechanisms to make that work.
Oh yeah, that's definitely an enterprise pattern. You'd use Key Vault for your connection strings if you can. I know that's not always possible, or access token keys or service. I'm drawing a blank on the other thing that we use for SQL connections.
App settings.
Well,
Service
you can use,
principles.
yes, thank you. Service principal or access. There's also that access token way to do it. I forget what the technical term is, and maybe that is the technical term in Azure. Corey, do you remember what you know what I'm talking about? It's like an authentication token. And maybe I'm thinking about Azure Functions and not SQL Server. But anyway, I digressed there a
They
little
have
bit.
identity management, I guess, is one way.
Yeah, managed identities.
Managed identity, yes. Yeah, that works too.
And management and managed identity is available through static web apps.
Well, the static web app itself wouldn't have a connection, but the API behind it would. You'd have to have some kind of, so the static web app itself, unless it was Blazor or something like that, um, would have to hit some sort of APIs, and then the APIs would have the data connections.
Mm-hmm.
Your static web app, I believe, and this is going off memory, do support some, I believe Entra, it used to support or supports GitHub out of the box, and I think it used to support X for authentication and authorization. I don't know if it does anymore, but you should still be able to do authentication authorization on a static web app based on Entra AD, I believe.
Yeah, like a single
Um,
sign-on thing. Yeah.
yeah. So if you do want to move, not it's probably not recommended, but if you do want to, you could potentially call something directly based on who that person is. Again, like you were saying, Matt, though, best practice would be to probably pull that behind in an API.
Mm-hmm.
That way you're not calling like a connection string directly or
Right.
Yeah,
um,
that common architectural pattern I think is out on Awesome AZD to do
yeah.
static web app service or static web app API, SQL Server or Cosmos database.
It's technically passwordless, so like I could see you make the argument that you want to do that if you're using managed identity or, you know, but yeah, you're still going to be giving up your database connection.
And then to take it a step further, put it on a private VNet, put an API gateway in front of the APIs. Maybe use, if you're serving up customers across the world or across the United States, then you want to start thinking about front door and having your APIs loaded. Well, maybe having your APIs distributed across multiple data centers too.
Great, thank you.
I would say it also, static apps by default really wants you to use Azure Functions. So if you're talking scalability there too, that's probably one of the more scalable approaches for an API because it's consumption based and should spin up or spin down based on need. So like Matt was saying, if you're not going full AKS, it's probably the closest thing with the least amount of overhead. If you build your API to work in there, you can just drop it in and deploy it.
Great.
Yeah, personally, I have a bias, but I prefer the function. I prefer doing functions or guys that work with me know this. I prefer the Azure functions over AKS, or even if the Azure functions aren't cutting it from a performance perspective, like a web API in an app service plan over AKS.
Hard pressed to think now with what was announced at Build for Functions that performance won't cut it. I mean, you can have 1,000 functions running at once for scalability purposes. So we've made a lot of inroads on increasing performance on functions.
Yeah, initially that was a problem, and I know some people went to AKS because of it, but it's definitely not a problem anymore.
Great, thanks, guys.
And if it is, you can talk to Derek. Any other questions?
Give me just a second. I'll turn off the recording.